Okay, well, welcome everybody to Leeds Theosophical Society again for one of our regular Zoom conversations, which are proving to be very popular. And I'm delighted this afternoon to welcome Wanda Sellar from the Astrological Lodge in London. We will be talking a bit about astrology, no doubt, in the course of the conversation. But the purpose of these is to look at individuals' lives and their work and how they've progressed on a particular spiritual journey or esoteric journey, if we might call it that. So, welcome, Wanda. And one of the things which intrigued me when you sent the background to your works and your life was the fact that we do share something in common. From a very early age, we were in the business of practicing the dark arts of journalism. You began life, I think, on local papers. I began them in the trade press. How did you get into journalism to begin with?
Well, from childhood and my teens, I wanted to do one of two things. It was either to go into the theatre or become a writer. So I went for an audition to join a theatre and failed that. Perhaps at 18, doing Lady Macbeth wasn't quite the ticket. And then I went for an interview at a local paper and I got the job. So it was almost fate that took me on the road to writing and journalism and authorship.
That's quite interesting because when I was at school, I wanted to do exactly the same two things, act or be a journalist. And I've done some acting at the local theatre and realised that journalism was probably a better option. So, how long did you spend in the local press?
Just a couple of years, and then I went on to a national newspaper.
And you became an agony aunt, yes?
Well, I didn't myself. I worked behind a big name. I think if you're old enough in the audience, you may remember Marjorie Proops. I don't know if people do. So she was on the Daily Mirror. She actually started as an artist, but then became a writer. Well, I don't think she was a, a a real writer as such, but she was quite good at sort of pithy sentences. So she, what she wrote, what the way it happened is she had a team of ladies, in which I included myself, actually answering the letters from readers, and she would then look at the letters, sign them, and they would appear in the papers. So that was quite a number of years I did that.
And then you moved into freelance writing of various kinds, didn't you, after that?
Well, yes, I left actually to go into healing. I had quite a sort of mystical experience. Well, I can't remember exactly which order, but I was in Spain and I had a mystical experience. And when I came back to England, I just then retrained to go more into the healing arts. And it was from working as an aromatherapist, reflexologist, I started writing about it. And that's when I started studying astrology as well, and I started writing about astrology. So the healing and the writing sort of coalesce.
Can you tell us any more about this experience that you had in Spain?
Well, I I should imagine a few of us here have had something similar, not exactly the same, something similar. And then afterwards, the rational mind kicks in and you think, well, what was that really? Was it my imagination? I was being driven in a car across Barcelona, and I suddenly had this amazing feeling of, may sound a bit sentimental, but of love. I felt that the world was just full of love, and my heart was almost bursting. Now, the person I was with, I mean, he was just happily driving along. I had no idea what was happening to me. And afterwards, I thought, well, surely that was my imagination. But when I came back to England, that's when my path started going along, all things healing, all things spiritual. So, as I said afterwards, I thought, well, that was strange. But of course, I didn't realize about our universe being so full of the second ray of love, and I think now I think, well, maybe I sort of linked into something. Do you know what I mean? So you rationalize afterwards, and you think, well, that wasn't anything really.
I think a lot of people have these experiences and do exactly what you did, which is to dismiss them. And often these things, not just these mystical experiences, but when you have, say, intuitive flashes, which a lot of creative people do, musicians and writers and scientists and other people have these intuitive flashes, but they often tend to ignore them and put them down to such things
Mm.
as daydreams and so on. How did you know that this? I mean, you had an initial skepticism about it. How did you know that this was an authentic message of some kind to set you off on a new direction? How long did that take?
Now, I knew at the time something amazing was happening. It's strange to divorce one moment from another, but at the time it was so powerful. It just something that like that doesn't happen to you every day. It was so powerful. But it was afterwards, like next day or a few weeks afterwards, you think, now what was all that about? I know I had something, but what was it really all about? But I did put two and two together once I was on my road, so to speak. Although, of course, at the time I wasn't thinking, I'm on the road now. I'm on a spiritual path. I wasn't thinking that. I think you're on the path before you realize it sometimes.
And interestingly, you were drawn towards various new healing techniques,
Mm.
techniques which lie outside the mainstream of medicine, but which are very popular techniques.
Yes, I hadn't actually ever considered doing anything like that, or I hadn't really considered becoming an agony aunt either. So again, it wasn't my conscious choices have always been to write and to act, but the healing choice was an unconscious one. I just went along that line, almost without realizing, except I had always had a feeling for aromas and perfumes. I think I once told you I had another. Do you remember I once mentioned and it only happened a couple of years ago, I had this experience of walking through the park and looking at a very dead tree. It was like burnt. It was a buddleia, totally burnt, black. And I rushed home to get some water to try to revive it. And before I put water on it, there was an amazing aroma around, and there was nobody in the park. At first, I thought it was somebody walking by with perfume. So I've always had this thing with the aromas, and so aromatherapy was the first subject, first topic of healing that I took up, and ended up writing a book about it, or two, should I say.
And how did you train for this aromatherapy? Did you self-train or did you go to some school or college or something like that?
Oh, I went to a college. Yes, yes. It was about that time when I started training. Nobody had heard of aromatherapy at all, and the sort of schools were popping up, so to speak. And then we had an umbrella organisation which standardised all the schools and made sure they were working properly and bona fides. So, no, I did train. I went on several courses, in fact.
And you also got into reflexology as well. Was that at the same time or was that
No,
subsequent?
that was a few years later. I got very interested in the whole art of healing. And of course, at the same time, I began studying astrology. And it was within a few years, I started, sorry, I think my familiar's walking around here. I don't know if you can see her, but yes, within a few years, I started editing the astrology and medicine newsletter as well for the Astrological Association. So the whole healing thing just sort of took off without me even trying, so to speak.
So it seems like that was the natural course of your life, and somehow you'd managed to connect with that. Because I think a lot of people go through life and they don't really connect with whatever purpose it is they have in this particular life. But you were fortunate enough to recognize through some sort of experience that this path of healing and astrology, is it unusual to combine the two, healing and astrology?
Oh no, that is exactly what astrology was always about. Or should I say, this is what healing was always about. It's the other way round. Those, let's say, the scholars who became doctors, they would use astrology in their healing. It's a kind of astrology called decumbature, which is from the Latin decumbere, to lie down. But basically, that's symbolic, to lie down. No, it can be absolutely literally. When you start feeling ill, you take the time and then you set up a chart. And this is what the healer astrologers used to do. They used to, when they would ask their patient, when did you first start feeling ill? Or if the patient came to their door, so to speak, they would take the time. So, because going back, people didn't really have timepieces. They didn't know their they didn't know their birth times. So doing natal charts was difficult. So no, astrology's always been used in healing.
So, are you able, in the work that you do, are you able to diagnose or predict illness using astrology?
Well, that is a tricky, not question so much, but I think we have to be very careful if we're not doctors. I mean, I'm not a doctor at all, although I've studied healing but from an alternative point of view. So you have to be very careful what you say. You cannot diagnose an illness or a disease. If I mean, people do come to me because they may be feeling ill and they don't know why, and maybe they've not had much success in getting a diagnosis. So I would not diagnose an illness, but I would say it looks as if it's in the region of, so to speak. But it diagnose, I think, would not be the right thing to do. And when I did, I don't practice aromatherapy or the physical therapies anymore. But when I did, I always took the time that patient, a client came, and I would always set up a chart to see if there was a way of augmenting what I was doing. So now I tend to look at the natal chart, and if the idea of the topic of health comes up, then I try to look at it psychologically as well, and try to advise what in which area they may improve, so to speak. But you have to be careful, really.
Now, I wonder, it's widely believed in many esoteric circles that quite a lot of disease, perhaps indeed all of it, has karmic origins, the stuff that we did in other lives, and how what happens to us in this life, the circumstances, our ill health or good health may be dependent upon that karma. Does astrology help to throw any light on this at all, and people's karmic burden, if you like, or karmic signature? Does it do anything to try and unlock those doors?
It depends which astrologer you're talking to, because not all astrologers see astrology as having a karmic basis. It's used very practically, um, to achieve something very materialistic in this life, which, we all want, happiness, health, money, all those things. They don't necessarily see a complex in the chart as having a karmic basis. It does depend. I mean, many astrologers do, of course, but many don't. So it depends. I most certainly do, because I also did practice as a past life regression therapist for 10 years. And I did bring the two together, and I do bring the two together very much so. I think the whole chart, the natal chart, is karmic. Every part of it is, because to me, every life is a continuum of previous lives, and there is a cord that runs through the charts that you can see in the chart that goes from one life to another. Although I don't know, and I don't suppose anyone really knows, unless you're Madame Blavatsky or someone in her ilk that can really go into this. But if you look at a natal chart now, it's rather complex, and I feel that it is made up of different past lives, and it's not always the last life that is most urgent to be looked at in this life. It's often a complex that has been coming through many times, many lifetimes, and then that faces you in this life. But I don't know if that's true. I'm not sure if I explained that very well, but
No,
it's a very complex thing.
I thought you explained it very well, Wanda, and it
Thank you.
fits on very neatly to this idea of past life regression, which is something that I have a personal interest in. And a few years before I became a theosophist, I actually had a number of these sessions conducted by an American hypnotherapist, and they were very, very interesting. Still have the tapes and the CDs with all the details of this on them. What first got you into this past life regression technique?
Well, it's going back about 20 odd years. I think I must have attended a lecture. Yes, I pretty much attended a lecture on past life regression, and something clicked, you know, something you hadn't been thinking about. And then suddenly you're at a lecture and you think, this is for me. And Dr. Keith Hearn, who was running these courses, and I attended that course with a couple of friends. Also, I attended some other courses. There was a Roger Walger, I think that might be a name you come across perhaps, and I kind of took to it like a duck to water. I've always liked the past. I love history, so anything. But really, I think the most important lesson I've learned with regression therapy and past lives is it doesn't really matter who you were. What matters is the issues you're dealing with. So you could be a scullery maid or a king. It doesn't matter. It's the issues that are important. But I think a lot of people um, do find it a glamorous thing. Who was I in a previous life? So I mean, at first, I suppose it is glamorous, it is exciting, but after a while, you realise it's the issues that are important.
Yes, when I studied this and I found that they did close analysis of the sort of people that individuals were in previous lives, when they looked at the socio-economic thing, only about 5% were aristocracy and 15% class, and the rest were just ordinary working
Absolutely.
peasants. Not everybody was Napoleon or Nero or someone like that, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How, I mean, it is a therapy. It's a past life regression therapy. So if somebody says to you, if your client there says, I was Napoleon or I was Cleopatra, you still take that seriously because it's a therapy and you have to look at the reasons behind them actually coming up with such a figure. There's an issue linked to that particular persona that the person has, um, let's say, imagined. I mean, there must be hundreds of Cleopatras around that people have felt, oh, I was. I, I've only had that once in all the therapies that I've undertaken. I only had one person. And you treat it, because I'm a trained counsellor as well. I think, like you, I sort of got into lots of different things and lots of therapies. And so I would just then look at the whole issue from a counselling therapeutic point of view. Why do they feel why have they identified with, i.e. Cleopatra, for instance? But most of the time, yes, the people that came through were very ordinary. I don't think I've had any real very important people, and sometimes people are a little bit disappointed.
It's interesting that you, as you say, this therapy was developed for therapeutic reasons. And I remember when I first started studying it, I forget the name of the individual involved, but they actually went on to become a past life regressionist themselves. But they'd had these terrible, terrible stomach problems all their life, this particular man. And he'd been to all sorts of doctors and specialists, and no one could find the root cause of this. There seemed to be no physical cause. There was no pathology in the stomach and everything. So he had one of these sessions done, and he recalled a life when he'd been a prisoner in a jail in Mexico. And one of the prison guards had thumped him hard in the stomach with the butt of his rifle. And as soon as he realized this and came out of this session, the illness went, and he never felt any more pain again. Have you come across that
Oh,
with?
oh yes, yes, yes. In with my clients and with reading about it, yes, absolutely, because it's the emotional underlay that you have to look at. It freezes in time. Whatever happens, it's often emotional, and it needs an abreaction. It needs to be released, needs to be faced, looked at, understood, and then released. And this is where I began to use these techniques within astrology. I could sort of trace, looking at the chart. I mean, most people think astrology is just about prediction, and that's the main thing it's used for. But I use it to look back at the past as well to see what it is that the person's dealing with. And so I can take them by looking at the chart, I can pinpoint the age that something occurred that caused a trauma. Um, and so we can look at that. Of course, I'm not doing past life regression therapy when I'm looking at a chart, but I can go back into the childhood, and that usually is a link from the past. So when psychologists just go back to the childhood, that's just the tip of the iceberg in my mind. It goes back further than that. But you can actually still help the client by going back to the childhood moment and looking at the emotional underlay that 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 is connected to the physical event. And I just must say at this point that it's not always a trauma. It is in childhood, obviously things are happening all the time, and the child connects or concocts rather a way of dealing with an issue which may not be the right interpretation, but they live with that and it carries on until you look back at it and you look at the reality behind it. Does that make some sense? So it's
Yes.
not always a trauma, it's how you perceive things and you carry that approach with you, and then you carry on making, let's say, the same mistakes again and again because it was the wrong connection in the first place. It's quite complex, so it is hard to explain.
Without betraying any client confidentiality, what are the most interesting things that people have said to you during these sessions and the periods of history they've been in? Do they cover all periods, or are some periods of history covered more than others?
Um, well, when I was doing regression therapy, uh, there wasn't one particular historical moment. It went all over the years, so to speak. It could be any age. But when I have read about um, others, it seems as if these cases that have happened in India, where young children remember a lot of their past life, they seem to have happened just like a few years back, and they can even connect to the family still. So I've not worked that one out yet because a lot of other therapists, regression therapists I've known, they had clients from all over the years, so to speak. But in India, it seems as if maybe they've just got a different view, different way in India or in Asian societies, obviously, because they're more accepting of regression or reincarnation, should I say?
Yes, absolutely. The work that Ian Stevenson did with very young children
Yes,
and found
yes,
that they knew about previous families, and these children actually took them in some
yes.
instances, and they found money buried under the floor and all kinds of things like that.
I know it's just absolutely amazing work that he did. As I said, it's a very sort of they reincarnated quite quickly, you know,
Mm,
so they would know. Oh, I'll take you to the next village and meet um, my wife. This is, you know, like a 10-year-old child talking,
yes.
and so you think. Oh, and yet the experience I've had and others, it's like often a couple of 100 years have gone by.
Mm. They do say, though, I mean, in a lot of the theosophical literature and a lot of the esoteric writers have said that children who die young, usually before the age of 6 or 7, often reincarnate very quickly, as do young men who are the predominant victims of war. When they die as soldiers, they often reincarnate very quickly, and this explains to some extent why there is a baby boom at the end of major wars, as there was at the end of the Second World War. And I am a member of that generation and everything. So
Mm.
people also, I gather, and I've read some interesting accounts of this, when they are regressed and they describe a particular period of history and a particular social structure, often they come back with information which even the experts in the field don't know about. Have you come across any instances like that?
Not that I can think of immediately. No, I can't. Um, and of course, if the only thing I can think of was actually when I was regressed at one time. I was actually at this conference, and somebody was doing a talk on regression, and I was the subject, and I turned out to be a young boy on a ship, and I had died. And he asked me, "What did you die? Or what killed you?" And I said, "The plague." Now, at that time, I had no idea. I didn't know that people could die of the plague on a ship because this was going back a couple of 100 years ago. I thought they died of scurvy and other things, but apparently, the plague was quite common disease to die of on a ship. I didn't know that at the time. So what I'm saying is it didn't come from my imagination or my reading of but I have come across it in my reading of, I mean, this idea that lots of people have come through with a past life story, and they've not been believed because that's not what is in the history books. And then
Mm.
it was found out to be true. So you're quite right there.
When I had my own past life regression sessions, there were three of them, and they took place about 20 years ago. One of my memories, shall we say, was of this strange medieval monk called Brother Amos, who seems to have been, as well as a monk, he travelled around a lot delivering documents. And there was this idea that he might be some sort of secret agent working for different aspects of the church and everything. But I recall being in various places like chapels, and I could smell incense and watch the candles, and I could feel the rough clothing that I was wearing in a big leather pouch. So these things were all very real as part of that. And I could sense the whole atmosphere. It was a very sinister atmosphere. And I also remember walking, on pathways through woods at night and being extremely, aware of everything around me. So these were very, very real experiences. And
Hmm.
you could say, okay, it's just your imagination. You're a writer, you have a well developed imagination. But people who don't have much imagination still go through exactly the same things, don't they?
They do. And also, I believe, or no, I'm pretty sure, we are we all have moments of our past lives creeping up on us in waking time. Suddenly, well, there's the case of deja vu, of course, that suddenly you get this strong feeling of having been at a place or met somebody, but just things that you say or ideas that creep into your mind or shoot into your mind. I think we do come, past lives do come through us, especially moments when we're acting out of character, or so to speak, out of character. It is part of our character that doesn't come through in the day-to-day working of your life. So I think they're with us, but as often been explained, we cannot have our past lives at the forefront of our mind, otherwise we wouldn't be able to get on with the current life. But they're not very, those memories aren't that deeply buried. They can shoot through, don't have to go through a regression therapy moment, so to speak, with a therapist.
And they're probably quite fresh in some children, particularly children as the ones we were describing earlier who've died young in a previous life. And the memories of that life tend to bleed through, but will probably vanish for all sorts of reasons by the age of 5, 6, or 7, due to all sorts of other influences and everything. But you're right. I mean, if one of the things that people who don't believe in reincarnation say to you is, well, if this exists, why can't we remember previous lives? But as you rightly observed, if we did, and if we were carrying the burden of everything that we'd done in all our other lives, or indeed some of our other lives when we probably behaved in a way that we would find appalling now, there would be such
Mm.
a burden of guilt. It would be an impedance on our current life. Do you think
Yeah.
that's the case?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. We just wouldn't be able to function. And remembering past lives, or let's say undergoing regression therapy, isn't for everyone at all. I think it is a therapy. Although I don't know if you've come across this, some people see it as an entertainment. I've seen even local theatre. I live in Essex, and about 10 miles away, we have a theatre where I remember somebody actually uh, came on stage. I mean, he was billed as a find out your past lives, and he took people from the audience and hypnotized them and had them acting out past lives. Now, I went to this because I couldn't believe that somebody could use this as an entertainment. I had to see what was going on. And I started, and I think it does happen. I'm not sure how often, but it is used as an entertainment, and it's quite dangerous, really, to use it as an entertainment.
Yes, I mean, you'd call it meet the ancestors, wouldn't you, or something like that? Yeah, I think using those kind of techniques for entertainment can be, extremely dangerous. But in the world we live in, you wouldn't expect anything less, really. I mean, people have always, even in the early days of the Theosophical Society, they wanted spectacle, they wanted phenomena, they wanted things, letters from the masters dropping out of the ceiling, and it was all this kind of visual.
Sensation. People
Yeah.
want sensation, and dare I say it, I think one of the um, factors that was attractive about Madame Blavatsky is the fact that she could do that sort of thing, and this is what people wanted. And in a way, people who know you're an astrologer also think you're going to come up with something amazing like that as well. Not quite sure what astrology means. I mean, it doesn't happen that often, but has throughout my life. People think you're going to do something. They want the sensation of it.
Let me ask you a slightly strange question, Wanda. Do you
Mm.
get people, or did you get people coming to you for these past life regression sessions who didn't believe in reincarnation, or did they come along to try and confirm a belief in reincarnation if they were slightly agnostic about it?
Well, I think probably a lot of people were like that. It was uh, the conscious motivation for being there was just that, in a way, curiosity, not really believing, but let's see what happens. That was the conscious one. But more often than not, there was a deeper, complex behind all that they were looking to address and redress. So yes, ostensibly it was that sort of let's see what's going to happen. Don't quite believe this. I think we've probably all been in that situation. Maybe going to an astrologer, also feeling, oh, I'm not sure I believe in all this. Let's see what they've got to say, because I believe basically, whoever you are, and maybe it's not terribly conscious, you are searching because we're all on the path. You're either, consciously you're on the path or you don't know it, but you're still on the path and you are searching. You're looking for answers. You want to find some meaning. So everybody's got that in them. They want some meaning, even if it's not a conscious thing in their mind.
When people undergo things like near death experiences in one form or another, they often come back profoundly changed by all this. You get greedy, nasty, materialistic people who are just out for themselves who suddenly, give away their possessions, start to do charitable work, do a different job in extreme cases. Have you found the same with your clients when they've had these past life regression sessions? Has it had a spiritual effect on people? Has it turned deeply materialistic people onto another path at all?
Um, Yes, maybe not quite as dramatically as that, but the whole purpose of regression therapy, and using those techniques within astrology too is to make people think differently. Now that can be because in a very dramatic way they've linked into the pure spirituality out there and it's changed them. Or on a much smaller level, they've suddenly thought, I was thinking that way. Now I realize I was wrong. I'm going to change my approach. And it could be dramatic, or maybe it'll just be in a small way. But the whole idea is for change, yes.
Okay, well, as we bring things to a close, we started off with your work as a writer. Just talk us through the books you have written and what you might be working on at the moment, if anything.
Okay, the as I said, I was writing for newspapers most of my life, but I then was teaching aromatherapy, and I was making these profiles of the oils, all different levels in the profile, the way it affected you mentally, psychologically, physically, etc. And I thought, this would make a good book, a good ready reckoner. So I put it all together. And so my first book was on aromatherapy. And then my second book was on aromatherapy, but it was about frankincense and myrrh, the history of frankincense and myrrh. And then I wrote my first book on astrology, which was called The Consultation Chart, which is a little bit of what I was explaining before, how when you meet somebody for the first time, or if they're ill, and you take the time of the moment of the meeting. Then it was Introduction to Medical Astrology, then Introduction to Decumbrature Astrology. That's again both medical. And the fourth astrological book was Chart Shapes, the shape of the chart. In other words, the planetary shape of the chart. So it's a kind of visual thing. And I'm working on two astrology books now. And because I do so much work for the Astrological Lodge, and one of them is being a co-editor of the magazine, which takes up an awful lot of my time writing for it. So I'm going very slowly on two books. One is about the 12th house. That is, for those who are not into astrology at all, it's part of the astrological chart. And the book that is like close to my heart, I'm writing a book on of the 12 signs, and it's 12 women of valor, or 12 remarkable women. And I've chosen a woman for each sign of the zodiac.
Well, that
And that
sounds.
and that's more fun than anything.
Now, your books are available where? If people want to get hold of them, how can they find them?
Well, it's basically the Wessex Astrologer or on Amazon.
Okay. But thanks again, Wanda, for a very, very wide-ranging and interesting conversation. And I hope we can get you back again in the not too distant future. So thank you, everybody,
Thank you,
for
Tim.
participating, and have a very good week ahead. And we'll see you at some point in the future. Bye for now.
Bye.